Howdy. This video, I want to go over the schedule real quickly, then go over the poetry essay, make sure you understand what I'm looking for there, or at least make sure we're on the same page. I'm doing this video on Thursday, April 13th. And if you notice my emails and the posting in D2L, hopefully everybody's getting response number 14 and 13 and essay number 2 in this week. A little tardy getting the drafts back to you for essay number 2, but hopefully everybody has plenty of time to get that completed. But after that, we're going to be working on essay number 3 for the next week. Then we'll start working on the final exam. For the final exam, I'm going to send you the questions on the 24th, and you'll have a week to respond to them and complete response number 15 as well. So there won't be any surprise questions. You don't have to study for it or anything. It is going to cover the material we've learned in class and some of the major ideas. Kind of like I said in one of the first videos, I kind of gave you the final exam questions right up front there. But we'll go over those again. But for right now, I want to go over essay number 3. The material for essay number 3, is up there in D2L under material for essay number 3. I'm sorry if I make some gross old man sounds during the video. My car was covered in pollen when I went out today, so I'm dealing with that. It's been a hard semester just in terms of general illness, but anyway. But you're just going to go here to Poetry Essay Assignment Spring 23. I'm going to go ahead and download it. And basically for a poetry explication, there's no research involved in this essay. It's just you and a poem. Kind of going at it. And you're going to write an 800-word poetry explication on one of the following poems, and I provide them there, and they're copied farther down in the assignment there. But you're going to pick one of these 8. And the challenge for this assignment is picking the poem you want to work with. Maybe the poem you like the most, or the one you hate the least, however you want to look at it. Hopefully the one or two kind of appeal to you. But again, kind of think back to the responses, how those poets are reading their poetry. If you just kind of plow into them, you're not going to get much out of them. You kind of got to, I know that's hard at this point in the semester, but kind of take a deep breath, get your mind ready, and kind of get in that poetry kind of mindset. Poetry explication is a line by line or stanza by stanza informed response to a given work. So basically it's reader response, but it's informed reader response, and you're going to support what you say with plenty of quotes to stay focused on where you're getting your ideas from within the poem. So if you just tell me that Damp Virginia Late Summer is about Obamacare, I'm going to be like, this is going to be an interesting explication, because how are you going to support that idea using quotes from the poem? In fact, that's a good way to know you're getting a little off track if you can't use quotes from the poem to support what you're saying. But it is your detailed response. You're not going to use the word I. Your name's on the paper. I know it's your ideas. But you're going to unfold this poem and kind of expand on how that poem works and what's happening in the poem in terms of how you're reading it. And that can be a challenge. I'm somebody who likes to summarize things, right? This Emily Dickinson poem's about death, right? Okay, where's the next poem? It's like, no. You got to go line by line, stanza by stanza through the poem and explain where you're getting all of your ideas from. It's a good critical thinking skill. You're going to have to do this in life quite a bit. When I worked in restaurants and we had to fire somebody, we had to be able to explicate the process of why, from beginning to end, we wanted this person fired. So if they wanted to file for unemployment insurance, we could go in and say, no, this person did this and this and this, and they should not, we shouldn't get tagged for this unemployment. And you do this all the time. If you're going to be an engineer and the bridge collapses, you can't just go, oops, bridge fall down, go boom. You're going to have to explicate the process where that caused that bridge to fail, and you'll kind of go step by step. And that's kind of what we're doing here. Same thing if you're a computer person and trying to find what's wrong with some code. You got to go back and try and explicate that code and figure out where the problem is. So it's an interesting critical thinking skill. It's also an interesting sentence structure exercise. Using quotes to support what you're saying and all this, it requires you to be able to quote properly, introduce quotes, comment on them, format them properly. So technically, it's a very technical assignment, but hopefully it's also maybe not quite as intense as like that last one where you had to play a comic book and 2 critics in your head and you're trying to figure it all out. It's just you and the poem here. You should not conclude any biography of any kind. That's a great way to get a 0. Some of these you can't, but like the William Carlos Williams one, the Descent, He's a fairly famous poet. It's not one of his more famous poems. But I don't care that he was a doctor in New Jersey and hated T.S. Eliot and did this and did that. You're going to be focused solely on analyzing that poem. You should have all that fun punctuation. We're also going to add the slash that's going to show line breaks and short quotes. I'll show you that with the sample essay. Should be using 7 of these terms. I'm not going to do a big lecture video. I've got a handout that I'll show you here in a second that goes through these terms. Probably a lot of you had these in high school. You might need a quick refresh and go like, oh yeah, that's what that is. But if it's been a while since high school, you may have to go over them in a little more detail. But no iter you. I may be seeing something quite different in the poem, so don't use, as a reader, you see this. I'm gonna just write no, I don't, just to be mean. And no its and no I's, right? The only reason you might use an I if you have like some very, real personal experience with a topic in the poem. If you were raised in Dant, Virginia late summer, you might actually use I in your explication a little bit, but certainly not throughout the poem. Or if you've been through basic training, you might kind of say, this is fairly authoritative writing because I was in basic training, and he's giving an accurate description. All right, so you got 8 poems to choose from. Again, you're just going to pick one poem, and they're all kind of different. They're all kind of ambiguous. It's going to require you to kind of show us what you're thinking as you read through the poem. And I've done that on purpose, so I'm not reading the same essay over and over. This is not a math problem, right? This poem doesn't equal X necessarily. So the first poem, Dant, Virginia, late summer. Dant, Virginia, as a small was still a town in Southwest Virginia, but used to be heavily relying on the coal industry. Of course, they've moved out. And poem's kind of discussing what the town's looking like. And again, as you're thinking about how you're going to organize your explication, if the poem's already broken down into stanzas, like this poem has 5 stanzas. Stanzas are those group of lines that poets clump together for various reasons. But this poem has 5 stanzas. So a good way to organize your essay would be to spend a paragraph on each stanza. It's kind of an easy way to do it if the poem lends itself to that kind of organization. A Woman with Black Balloons, a very interesting poem. And if you never received black balloons before, generally you get those on your 40th or 50th birthday, and it's kind of making fun of your getting near closer to death. It's kind of a dark joke. I mean, we don't give them for 80th birthdays, right? That'd be kind of morbid. And she's just kind of talking about balloons, this life and death kind of idea, and what these balloons start representing to her as a poet. Very interesting poem. Again, you got this poem in stanzas, so you might just spend a paragraph on each stanza, even these one-sentence ones. And you'd have, I think that's 7, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You might have a 6-paragraph essay there. The Dog in the Night by the same poet, Jean Wagner, or Jean, or however you want to pronounce it. This one's a little different. This is one long stanza, so within your essay, you're not going to write just one paragraph for 800 words. You want to figure out how you're going to break your paragraphs. Where are the natural breaks in the poem, where you can kind of give your reader a little mental break as you go to the next paragraph. A very interesting poem. Starts off having a close call, hitting her dog with a car. Then it gets into some interesting material. By the end, you're kind of like, wow, okay. But it's a really nice poem, actually. She's a good poet. Numerology, a poem about turning 7, kind of that perfect age. Everybody has that perfect age when they were a kid and they had no worries. You didn't have to write poetry essays or go to school or have your job or deal with your kids or anything like that. You were just kind of having that perfect year. And for this persona, that year is 7. And she's going to talk about that and what kind of things are happening. The Descent by William Carlos Williams. Again, he's a fairly famous poet, but no biography. There might even be an explication out there somewhere on the internet. But this poem's so ambiguous, it's going to be hard to copy someone else's work, I hope. And also you'll fail if I catch you. And generally, Turnitin picks it up pretty quick. So please don't do that. The Descent, very ambiguous poem. You might be halfway through this going like, what in the world is this guy talking about? But it's also, I've received really good essays on this poem. where students trying to figure out, what Williams is talking about, and he's kind of talking about this feeling and this ambiguous feeling about, kind of going towards the end of something. And you also see it's very experimental with the indents and the punctuation and everything. And it looks like they've got a very good poet being very experimental here. So if the poem kind of appeals to you, it might be a good one to work with. But expect some ambiguity here, where you kind of like, no whiteness, lost is so white it's a memory of whiteness, and you can be like, okay. Or you might go like, I get that. I don't know how I could, it's going to be a challenge to explain that, but that's kind of what the explication does. You explain what you're getting out of the poem. This be the simile, another unpublished poem. You got to kind of figure out what that simile is and how it works. The challenge with this poem is it's very short, so you're going to have to go through every line and unfold every line, and you're not going to be able to just kind of summarize each stanza. So the challenge there is that you got kind of a short poem that you got to explicate and pull a lot of meaning out of. Then a couple by Sherman Pearl. One Demolition Derby. This is another one that's just one long stanza, so you're going to figure out how you're going to break your paragraphs. It's also kind of short, so again, you want to be able to go through every line and unfold what you think is happening within that line and how that poem's working with each line. And you got to notice all these poems are open form poems. We're not worrying about foot and meter and stuff like that. Maybe a little rhyming in a couple of them, but we're not worried about rhyme schemes and stuff like that. And Pearl likes to write about his relationship with the sun, or at least he develops personas that do that. This one kind of starts with Demolition Derby and moves on to some interesting material there. And the last one, Basic Training, starts off fairly straightforward. It's just about a recruit going through basic training. But then all of a sudden in the middle of the poem, there's somebody else there. And you got to go like, whoa, okay, what's going on here? And that's kind of the fun of reading explications, is seeing what students come up with and how they interpret these different things happening within these poems. So you got eight poems to choose from. And again, they're all a little ambiguous because I don't want the same essay on each poem, right? So students will be responding a little differently, but again, you're going to go through and support what you're saying with short quotes from the poem, which we'll talk about here in a second. But that's the assignment. And again, 800 words is the minimum. But that's kind of plenty, because you're not going to have an introduction paragraph or a concluding paragraph. You're going straight into the poem, so it's 800 pretty intense words. And we'll go back to material for Essay 3. There's a little handout on how to write a good poetry explication. Go over that real quickly. But kind of maybe it's not obvious, but it's not a bad idea to go ahead and print this poem if you have a printer, and kind of start marking it up a little bit in the margins. Note any words you don't understand or anything that's happening in the poem where you're like, you lost me there. So you can go back and try and make sense of it, right? That's what your job is with this essay, is to make sure you're not skipping things you don't quite understand. But don't forget you got that word ambiguous. The poet is using ambiguity here, and kind of list the different ways it might be the poem might be being ambiguous. I think that's a sentence. But like Oomphalo's and A Woman with Black Balloons, I had no idea what that was when I first read the poem. I had to go look it up. And that's what you should be doing as well. So you're not really doing research, but you may have to look up the meaning of words just to kind of know what's happening in the poem. But very important, there's no introduction or concluding paragraph to this poem. You're going to start your explication with the words in line 1 of this poem. This writer begins with, and then to start with the first line of the poem and start taking this through either stanza by stanza or line by line. No biography. And again, you're starting with the first line, and you're going to take a stanza by stanza or line by line through that poem, pretty much in a straight line. You don't want to jump around too much, because as you quote, you're kind of showing how the poem's unfolding as you're doing your quotes too. Don't omit major sections of the poem. You got to talk about every part of that poem. Pretty much every line of the poem. You may not quote every line if you have one of the longer poems, but you're certainly going to touch on every line as you go through. No I, you, or it, unless they're in a direct quote. again, like if you were actually in basic training, you may comment with a little personal information and with the Sherman Pearl poem. But that's about it. The rest, maybe if you lived in Dant, Virginia, you might have something using I to add. But generally, none of this I personally think that kind of phrasing, or I think that, or I see this. It's your name on the essay. That's kind of implied. It also kind of makes your writing sound wishy-washy when you start qualifying what you're saying like that. Make sure you have the terms. You want to use frequent short quotes. That's one of the keys to a successful explication. Use short quotes, one, to support what you're saying, but also keep the reader focused on where you're at within the poem. You're going to start using the line numbers. You can either do that in the introduction to the quote or after the quote in parentheses. Generally, you want to avoid long quotes. You may, like in Dant, Virginia, late summer, there's some very short lines, so you may end up quoting long quotes for poetry or 4 more lines. And make sure you focus on analyzing the poem. Don't go off on a rant or if you were like in basic training, don't give us a 5,000 words on your experiences in basic training. That's not the point. You're analyzing the poem, so you may talk a little bit about your experience, but make sure you get back to the poem pretty quickly. Notice bolded, underlined, exclamation point. Always introduce and comment on any quote you use in your essay. Don't make a quote its own sentence. Make sure you incorporate it into your writing. And if you use one of these terms, make sure you point out how the author is using that term. Like, don't just say there's a simile in basic training. Well, yeah, probably. There's similes in almost every poem. What is a simile and how does it work within the poems? What you're getting into. Brackets and ellipses will start to be your friends. You'll have to change words to make sure the quotes make grammatical sense with your introductions and whatever else you're saying. You might use ellipses to if you start quoting in the middle of a line or something like that. And again, at the end of the explication, no concluding paragraph. You should be ending with the final thought or the last line of the poem. Probably don't want to end just quoting the last line of the poem, but the final thought should kind of discuss that at the end of the poem. Maybe any open questions the author's kind of left open, but please do not go back and repeat what you've already said. Just don't do that. That's not how explication generally works. So no introduction without the introduction and concluding paragraph. The 800 words are going to be pretty intense. It's going to be some intense writing. That's what makes these fun to read as well. So make sure you go back to that every once in a while as you're working on the essay. There's some notes on the poetry terms here. You might just go through and read that real quickly. I used to do a video of it, but students actually in the end of semester commentary kind of said, please don't do that anymore. Just write it out and let us do it on our own time. Plus, generally students can read faster than I can talk, right? If you're getting worn down right now with the video, it's a good place to pause. But I'm going to go over a sample essay real quickly. I'm not going to read this thing to you. Excuse me. Word for word. Download. And this is on Robert Frost's fairly famous poem, The Road Not Taken. The writer here is going to argue that this poem's kind of been misinterpreted quite a bit. It's not really about the road not taken, it's the road less traveled. Anyway, we'll get into it here. This writer, it's a 4-stanza poem, so this writer is going to break it down into four paragraphs, spend a paragraph on each stanza. It's a good way, so it's going to be some fairly long paragraphs because the stanzas are fairly long. But again, no biography, no research. Don't care that Robert Frost read at John F. Kennedy's inauguration or won this award or did this or did that. We're just focused on analyzing this poem, going line by line or stanza by stanza through the poem. And even if you're going stanza by stanza, you're still going line by line within that paragraph. So here in the first stanza of his poem, The Road Not Taken, Robert Frost presents a scene familiar to all people through the persona of a traveler. Our traveler uses first-person narration to present us with the metaphor of 2 roads diverging in a yellow wood, a metaphor that represents the proverbial fork in the road we all encounter when making a life decision. All right. So you can see the writing gets pretty technical and intense. We're starting to use our our vocabulary here, our terms. That's what the word I'm trying to get to. You don't have to define them within your essay, but you should use them properly. And we do have a first-person I speaking in this poem, so first-person narration. This may not necessarily be Frost speaking, so Frost is adopting the persona through this first-person narration. And I'm going to talk about the metaphor of like I said, the proverbial fork in the road, two roads diverging in a yellow wood. Notice using the brackets to change the verb a little bit so it makes sense with what I'm saying grammatically. Even threw in a dash in there. So a lot going on in that sentence, right? And of course I'm citing using line number there. In lines 2 and 3, we find that our traveler must make a choice and cannot remain static. Again, you can do the line number in the introduction like this, or you can do it through a citation in the parentheses. Either way you want to go. Static. Then I give a quote. I cannot travel both and be one traveler. I ended before the end of the line there, so I'm going to use my ellipses. So again, a lot of this is showing us that you can unfold the poem, but a lot of this is also sentence structure, incorporating quotes into what you're saying, being able to support what you say through these quotes. Then we're going to talk about that. The personas point suggests that even if we decide not to choose, we are still heading down a path. If we choose not to marry, we've made a choice. If we choose not to have children, we have made a choice. Any life traveler must move forward in some direction. In addition, the narrator's observation of the color yellow for the wood indicates a traveler encountering this decision must use caution. That's very important. Whenever you hit a color in a poem, it's generally significant. Poets just don't throw colors in for funsies. So a woman with black balloons, what's that black signify? The color yellow is used in damp Virginia late summer. What's that kind of saying about the trees or what's happening to the town or whatever? And make sure you kind of expand on what you're saying. The color yellow shows us that that the traveler faces an important decision. Yet the color yellow also personifies a sense of aging, so we get caution and aging at the same time. Our traveler does not make a hasty decision. However, our traveler can't spend too much time vacillating between choices. The first stanza ends with the traveler peering down one of the roads to where it bent in the undergrowth. Again, notice how incorporating quote into the sentence. So you don't want to just quote, comment, make sure you're incorporating it into what you're saying so your paragraphs flow well. Because the traveler cannot see the future results of his possible journey down the first path. One interesting problem with this essay, they're assuming the persona is male. Probably want to go back towards the beginning and kind of justify that assumption. Or try to figure out why, as a reader, you're responding that way. So be careful there. Possibly down the first path, the reader gains a sense of ambivalence regarding the traveler's choice. Which road will he choose? And again, kind of establishing this idea that we all have these choices to make in life, and we don't know which choice is going to be the best one, but we got to choose anyway, and we just got to go with the choice we made. A lot of students aren't always comfortable with the major they've chosen. It's like, well, I just had to choose something, but you made a choice, and now you're being pushed down that pathway. And it's hard to go back and change, right? Kind of interesting. But we do make all kinds of decisions like that. But hopefully you can kind of see how that's working. Incorporating the quotes. There's a slash to show line breaks within a short quote. Long quotes will have be tabbed over once and have the original line breaks. I might send you out another handout showing that. I'm not going to read the rest of this to you. You can kind of see how it's working. But again, frequent quotes to keep us focused on what you're saying, but you're commenting on these quotes, you're showing the quotes are supporting what you're saying, not saying it for you. And you're not just repeating what the quote says. You want to make sure you're expanding on what the quote's saying. And it goes all the way. Notice there's no concluding paragraph. We don't go back and summarize what we've already said, right? They're going to go back to the travel, to the title, and point out that the poem's not titled "The Road Less Traveled," but "The Road Not Taken." So did he really take the road less traveled? Probably not. So it's kind of interesting. Make sure you have the works citus page. That's a really old one. If there's underlining there, you need to update that one because you don't underline anything in an MLA paper anymore. But hopefully that helps you see how the poetry explication can work. If you need to go read the poem "The Road Not Taken," you could Google that very easily, and you can have people reading it for you aloud. So pretty intense assignment, but hopefully once you finally work through and pick out the poem you want to use and kind of get started, generally it starts to go a little bit, you start to get into it a little bit. It's kind of the, figuring out, oh my gosh, which poem am I going to get? And it's a little intimidating. It's just you and the poem. So my best advice is to, once you finally pick your poem, just kind of get into it. Go ahead and start writing. It may not be perfect. You may have to go back and change things, and revise. That's pretty normal. But just getting into it can relieve a lot of the stress. But if you have any questions about it, be sure to let me know. I'm going to get you to send the first paragraph, probably on the 17th, where it says work on essay number 3. I'm going to ask you to just go ahead and send me your first paragraph to make sure you're on the right track. I won't go sentence by sentence or anything, but just make sure you're on the right track and maybe offer any suggestions there. So sorry for the long video, but that's the neat thing about YouTube videos. You can stop them whenever you get tired of listening to me and come back to them. But if you have any questions, be sure to let me know, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.